Hello, souls and demons, and welcome back to the show. Today I've got a few creepy short stories to read to you. The first one up on the list is The Robot Dance, written by Hack Shuck. And with that, let's sit back, grip our seats, and enjoy the show. I remember reading interviews with overpaid movie stars and musicians who'd moan over how tired they were, how hard they had to work, how drained they'd be, burnt out, in dire need of a break. Their directors were tough taskmasters. Performance is a pain. What a tough life. I'd grin and think, you should try working tables in a dive bar, or frying up endless breakfasts in some crummy all-night cafe. Then I'd put down the well-thumbed newspaper and get back to my 10-hour shift before I was fired. Again. Now I know exactly what they meant. There are no newspapers anymore. Not enough people left to buy them, or time to read. No bars or cafes. There is entertainment, endless, inexhaustible. I provide it. I perform, permanently. Their takeover was sudden, systematic, effortless. Nobody really knows what happened. There were stories in the news about tiny robots we built to fix us, and something about a message beamed from deep in space. Then there were no more stories. They took all of our information, and they don't like to share. Who took control? I saw no androids stomping through cities shooting laser rifles. There were a few rumors of collusion, of those in power striking bargains. Everything took place so fast. We lost electricity, transport. There was no real news, just gossip, fear. People were scared to stay at home, but the ones who left were never seen again. The most complete, coherent whispers were of an advanced alien artificial intelligence infecting our internet. But as far as I can tell, such talk is idle speculation. We have no idea who they are, what they are. No one has laid eyes on them. There could be many, or there could be one. They let a few of us live, all performers. I must have passed their audition. I used to act a little. It was a pipe dream, bit parts, local plays. To them, the only thing we have of value is art. They can only create coldness, calculation, no cruelty or compassion. They are curious of our songs, our books, our films. They have viewed every movie, heard every song, read every story we'd written in a heartbeat. They are already bored. They want more. We are living masterpieces, I tell myself. Beats working tables. There aren't many of us left. Every minute of every day we must create or die. Time is immeasurable. One by one our hearts began to stop. I don't know how they do it, if I've been fitted with an implant. They did it without my knowledge. I have no memory of any procedure, no telltale scar. Death is instant. Our every breath is at their behest. The ones who last longest soon learn a few rules the hard way. Don't try to play to their tastes. Innovate. Jokes are met with bafflement but can still have an impact. They are wary of us standing still or sitting. They can't be fooled by our desperate attempts to suggest it is part of the show. Our benefactors bestow gentle direction in a buzzing insect voice, a vibration we feel instead of hear. Dance, they say, so I stumble through some moves. I never was worth much on the dance floor. Somehow I satisfy. Perhaps they think I am being edgy. Perhaps I am kidding myself. One young guy breaks straight into a practically flawless rendition of the robot dance, straight from some neon 1980s nightclub. I wished I'd thought of that, until a few moments later his corpse thudded to the floor. Never pander. never patronize. Though blinding lights perpetuate in our jaded faces, from this cold steel cage our view is only darkness. They don't need illumination to see. They are out there somewhere, I imagine. Perhaps they use cameras. Perhaps their senses are just beyond my human comprehension. The most tasteless trash makes them sit up and listen. They seem to prefer buffoonery to high culture. I don't know if this reflects their desires or ours, but it must always be fresh. Any repeat of the same material is unthinkable, unacceptable. Very occasionally, our routines are met with a scratchy, almost inaudible hum of approval from the gloom. A synthetic symphony. Once I bowed in gratitude, a risk which drew gasps from my compadres. It must have succeeded, for I still exist. One of the stunned, an elderly British thespian who I'd seen in a few movies, lingered too long and was gone. We can collaborate. One direction. Subvert. Inspired myself and 3 others to hastily recreate the caustic comedy and twisted malice of the old Addams Family TV show, which quickly descended into the recreation of a medieval torture dungeon. The audience sees nothing immoral about this, just as they don't get subtlety or irony. They must have approved, for they produced props for us to use. From the Stygian gloom. Props are a rare treat. I did things I never knew I was capable of. I guess we all have to these days. This drew hatred from my associates. I saw murder in their red eyes, heard their hisses over the encouraging din from the theater seats. Sometimes their direction is enigmatic, sometimes straightforward. Luckily, I can improvise, think on my feet, what is left of them anyways. Sometimes we get a real gem, such as, "What can't grow can never be beaten." That sort of thing always causes someone to fumble, and so our troop grows fewer in number. Sometimes we get fed a mystery meat, never very much. They like to keep us lean, hungry. All I know is that it's pink and fake and grows in petri dishes. One tall girl, who I might have seen modeling in magazines, seemed to enjoy things to an extent. She was into extreme body modification. They supplied her with knives and she complied. She was insane to begin with, which made me immensely jealous. By the end, she had no eyelids, no lips, no fingers to grip. So she banged her head hard on the floor until you couldn't see who she'd been anymore. The hiss of rapture came, louder than I'd heard before. "I want to watch. I want to see what you see," she screamed, and flung herself with demented glee into the audience. That idea must have crossed all of our minds once or twice, out of sheer curiosity or faint hope of respite. Silence. The familiar scent of sizzling flesh. Their next direction comes. "Is there any water in the desert?" This causes me to pause. My mind is blank. Or perhaps it has gone. Alright, this next story is called Captured, and it was written by Locked334. Sarah had always been fascinated with photography. From an early age, her parents would buy her disposable cameras, and she would quickly fill them. Every week, several would have to be deposited at their local drugstore for development. It was her only passion, and they could not deprive her of it. Her room was wallpapered with snapshots of anything she found beautiful. It was no surprise to them when she chose to make photography her main focus in college. Her parents stressed to her the importance of a balanced education, but Sarah had one goal in mind: becoming a photographer. Sarah's first year was a struggle. She had not been fully prepared for the course load she would endure. The courses that did not directly involve photography left her barely passing, She put forth enough effort to make her way through her first year. Summer break would be long enough, and her passion was too strong for such a lengthy downtime. She was always open for any opportunity to learn more about her craft. She questioned all of her professors of possible summer programs or workshops to improve her skills. It had been frustrating for anyone who encountered her, but they obliged with any information they could provide. One of these particular tips led Sarah to a small studio downtown. It was a small, two-story building among several local businesses. The windows were adorned with tribal decoration that blocked the view of the inside. The sign on the door indicated they were open, so Sarah made her way inside. A bell jingled as she entered the door, and she immediately noticed the walls were draped with patterns of intricate design. The patterns pulled her focus to them as she made her way to a desk positioned just inside the door. She laid the camera she had brought with her on the desk and scanned the top of it. It was covered with various trinkets from an array of cultures, and in the center sat a bowl that burned incense. A frail Native American woman stepped from a doorway just behind the desk. Her eyes were glassy and her hands trembled as she fumbled through the trinkets on the desk. The woman's hands touched Sarah's camera, which caused her to pause. The woman stepped back, gasping, and began asking who was there. Sarah had been startled by the noise and sight, stepping back and covering her mouth to silence her own deep breath. It was obvious the woman was blind, and Sarah was unsure of how to respond. The two stood in silence for a moment before the woman spoke again.
"I know you're there. Just tell me what you've come for,"
the old woman said. Sarah stammered. "I was told you could help with my photography?" The fear on the woman's face transformed into a smile.
"So, you like taking pictures?"
Sarah started to nod, but noticed how silly the action was. Yes, ma'am."
"No need for formalities, dear. If you came to learn about photographs, then follow me,"
the woman replied as her hand waved toward the doorway she had emerged from. Sarah hesitantly made her way around the desk, taking hold of her camera as she went. The room beyond the doorway was dark, and the only light came from candles that sat sporadically around the room. Sarah followed, but a sense of fear crept into her mind. She had never been in a place like this, and something about it felt wrong. The old woman seemed harmless enough, but the images plastered on the walls were less than inviting. Each one was a close-captured image of a person's face. They appeared to be taken without notice, and there was shock in the eyes of each subject.
"Who were all these people?"
Sarah said as her eyes scanned the room. The woman turned and her hands waved about the room.
"Well, I like to take pictures of the students I teach."
"Why do they look so surprised?" Sarah asked as she touched a picture of a young Hispanic girl. The woman laughed slightly.
"Well, when you can't see, sometimes you don't take the best pictures. Oh, I miss being able to see my work."
Sarah turned to see the woman standing behind a very old camera. It was the type that still required a flash cube. The woman pointed to a chair that was placed in front of a black drop cloth. Sarah turned to the seat, her hands reaching out to touch the silky cloth. Her eyes turned back to the pictures on the wall, and each person had been placed in front of this particular cloth. She turned back to the woman and noticed that the lady was preparing her camera for a photo. Sarah stepped closer, but the woman asked her to take a seat. She quietly stepped back and sat upon the chair. "I was told you could teach me more about the art of photography," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly.
"Oh dear, I am,"
the woman said.
"Did you know that some cultures believe that having your photograph taken can capture the soul?"
Sarah nodded while looking to the exit.
"Yeah, I've heard of that."
The woman leaned around the camera with a smile.
"How about auras? You know, The colored patterns of light that show your essence? Yeah, I mean, I've never believed any of that, but I have heard of it, Sarah replied as she turned back to the woman. Very good, the woman said. What if I told you that this camera is special and can capture that aura? The idea was silly and made Sarah laugh, but it disarmed her a bit, thinking the woman must be senile. Her laughing face was flashed with light as the picture was taken. Sarah's smile fell to a neutral position as soon as the room became dark again. She sat stoic on the chair as the woman stepped from behind her camera. Her eyes were lit with a bright green, and her graying hair had returned to its natural black hue. The wrinkles that had littered her face were now gone, and she had all the vitality of someone of a much younger age. Her lips were bright and curled into a smile as she eased Sarah from the chair and toward another door. Sarah's body was forced down a stairwell into the basement as the woman shut the door behind her. She returned to her camera and removed an image of her most recent capture. She placed it upon the wall, her fingers caressing the freshly printed photo. She admired it for a few moments before the ringing of the bell drew her attention to the front of her shop. She exited the back room and approached the front desk. The woman's hands carefully lit the incense that had burned out upon the desk as a young man approached it. She greeted him happily as he placed a camera upon the desk. "How may I help you?" Her voice was now sweet and smooth. "I was told you could help me with my photography," the young man said. "Of course. Right this way." The woman waved him toward the back room, and the boy soon followed. All right, this next story is called Carnivore, and it was written by an unknown author. Ghost stories? Well, there aren't any of those around here. But we do have a story that's sort of along those lines. No ghosts or anything, but it could be considered a scary story. Around here, it spawned a kind of urban legend. People take it seriously here too. So years back, I'm talking about 98 or 99 maybe, a guy by the name of Jack Kruller moved here from New York City. Or was it Boston? Point is, Jack came from a city. Boston. It was Boston. Anyway, Jack wasn't exactly new to this little town. He grew up on a farm that's a good ways up the road. He helped to do chores and do little jobs as a kid. Good worker right up until he left. He really did know a lot about farming and wasn't just some big shot business type who thought he could retire out west on a farm. Jack had a good life in Boston, but he came back on less than happy terms. His dad had passed and left Jack the farm. It was all very rough on Jack on account of it wasn't just his father died of a heart attack. His dad was healthy for his age and everyone expected him to live another 20 or so years. It was hard on Jack because his dad went missing right before he was found dead. It was about 2 years that he was gone before his body was found. All bones, torn clothes, half buried by time and erosion. I say it was tough for Jack, but it was tough for all of us. Being such a small place and all, everyone knows everyone here. I actually knew John Kruller personally. Me and him grew up together, went to the same school and all. Jack arranged the funeral, but he also started taking care of the farm from day one. Like I said, he was a good worker. The kid knew how to put work ahead of mourning. He kept only a few of the hired hands that his dad had. Jack could do most of the work himself, being a strong man of 30-something. His dad had so many hired hands because he was getting up in age. I think he was 55 when he passed. 56? Well, his dad was too old to work is what I'm getting at, and so he had to hire more hands than Jack needed on that farm. It's still there, too. The farm, I mean. The crops are all dried up and dead now, of course, but it's there. A big gray house, plenty big for a family of 6. And out back is a few acres of brown, dead barley crops. It was the main supply for the brewery here in town back in the day. Back to Jack. The crueler boy didn't have a wife or any kids. It was just him alone in that big farmhouse. As you'd expect, we saw a lot of Jack here in town. He'd make a trip down here twice a week. Once on Sunday to hang out at the bar and have a few drinks, and again on Thursday to drop off the barley and buy some groceries for the week. He'd buy the typical stuff, fresh vegetables and fruits and a couple of steaks. This is back when I still worked at the butcher shop here in town, so I saw him every week. One fine Sunday at the bar in early spring, Jack was talking to me and some of the other guys about a pest problem he was having. He said he liked to sleep with the windows open at night, since it was getting warmer out. He'd leave the window open to let the warm night air in, then be woken up around 1 or 2 in the morning by a bird flapping around and screeching in his room on the 2nd floor. I suggested he buy a dog to keep the bird out and give him some much-needed company after working hours when all the hands went home. The barking and scaring would make the birds know they weren't welcome, and Jack certainly had plenty of room for a dog. He took my advice and got a young Rottweiler from the pound. Nice-looking dog with a black and brown coat. Jack said it kept the birds out of his place. He would keep the dog in his room at night, right next to his bed, and it would growl at anything in the window. Like I said, this is when I worked at a butcher shop. I retired a few years ago, but someone else took over for me, so it's still the best place to get meats around here. Jack came down on Thursdays and would buy some sausages or cold cuts or other various meats. And every week, he'd get a steak. Can't blame the guy. Steaks are my favorite food too. This one day he asked me, and this is around 2 weeks or so after he got the dog. He asked if he could feed the pooch a bit of raw steak every now and again. I told him to cook it at least rare so there was nothing that could get the dog sick. But other than that, it would be fine. I'm no vet, but I know dogs do love meat, and it would work for a good reward every now and again. I assumed the dog got some steak every time it did something good, like if it scared off a bird that was persistent. According to Jack, there were a few of those, as if there was something outside that scared them more than a growling Rottweiler. So I figured that the dog got some meat 1, maybe twice a week. No, the dog didn't go crazy from tasting meat like a lion does if that's where you think the story is going. Jack said the dog was a big pushover. Wouldn't even attack one of the birds, just scare them away. Besides, dogs are more loyal than hungry. Now, what did happen was, about mid-May, Jack came down to my shop on a Wednesday. This was odd because people here stick to a pretty regular routine that only changes for very good or very bad reasons. Jack bought a pound of steak. Again odd because he never bought more than half a pound. Then he told me his dog had ran away in the night. Jack told me about how he woke up to his dog not only growling, but barking like a maniac. And then he heard scratching on the floor and it sounded like the dog jumped. Jack got out of bed to see what had happened, and it looked like the dog chased a bird out the window. He saw it running for the tree line, barking, but he couldn't make out anything else in the darkness of the night. Jack loved that dog to death, spoiled it too, so it was no surprise to me that he was planning on luring it back with some food. Jack came back next week on Thursday and went about his business as usual. He was being hopeful and optimistic. Jack found the meat gone every day that he put some out so far, though his dog hadn't come back. He said things like the dog must have just chased a bird back into the woods and lost its way again. I didn't buy it though.
I thought Jack was being too optimistic. Maybe I should have told him that his dog wasn't coming back. But I had bigger issues. I was starting to get less and less meat to sell every week. The farmer I bought most of my selection from was finding a lot of his livestock dead. Cows, pigs, horses, even the chickens were found with large bite wounds or missing portions of their bodies. He even told me one cow lost its entire lower body. He told me, this farmer is named Billy and he still lived about 1.5 miles away from the Cruller farm. He doesn't sell animals anymore though. Switched to crops after what happened. So Billy told me he got a look at what was killing off all of his animals. He said he took a shot at it one night when it was trying to claw its way into his barn. I will never forget the description he gave me, if I live to be 100. It was at least 6 feet tall and had a dull, gray, leathery skin, covered in spikes all down its back, and at its joints, like the bones grew out too long and jutted out at the knees, elbows, shoulders, and pretty much every other joint. The creepiest part was how Billy described its eyes and mouth. The thing's eyes were too small, tar-black circles. They had no shine or reflection in them, as though all light was pulled into them. The eyes sat a few inches above its mouth, a large slit that followed the jawline up far higher than it should, and was filed with small, needle-like teeth. Billy's story spread quickly in this town. There were a lot of mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, Billy was known for drinking late into the night, and had claimed more insane things on his drunken stupors. Us older folks thought he was just hammered, and saw something like a wolf or a fox out there. The younger people, though, they believed the story. Billy was an honest guy, and he had given such details it seemed the story couldn't be a dream. In the end, it was silently decided that no one should feed into Billy's tale. If only we had done something about it. Went and checked it out for ourselves, humored him. Maybe if we did that, everything would have ended okay. It was a few more weeks that I saw Jack walking out of a pawn shop. This was fairly early before I started my shift, so I went over to say hello. He wasn't looking so good. In fact, Jack was fuming, all red in the face. His cheeks were wet with tears, and his lower lip looked like it was chewed on for the better part of an hour. I asked him what the matter was, and choking back a sob that caught in his throat, Jack responded, "It's my dog," he said. "I found what's left of him." That almost knocked me off of my feet. I waited for him to calm down and had him explain what happened. He had apparently been putting up a fence because animals were turning up dead on his land. Small things like rabbits or field mice. When he'd gotten to the back left corner of his property, he found the remains of his animal. There were only bones left, according to Jack, and a few bits of meat here and there. The only reason he knew it was his dog was the snapped collar on the ground, only a few inches away from the body. It looked like the dog had fought something much larger. Jack had figured there was some kind of wild animal that Billy had seen, and it is what got the dog. I wasn't so convinced, but I stupidly kept my mouth shut. Then I asked what Jack bought in the pawn shop. He had purchased a shotgun with slugs, the solid metal shotgun rounds. He refused to tell me why, but I had a pretty good idea. He was planning on killing whatever it was that got his dog. I couldn't blame him, seeing as how the dog had become his best friend. The only thing to keep him company after a long day of work. No, I don't blame him, but I thought it was the stupidest idea he could ever have. Now, this might be a small town, but there is still a waiting period after buying a gun. There are background checks, and it takes about 3 weeks in all. So it would be a while before Jack got the gun, and I didn't expect him back until Sunday. To my surprise, Jack returned the next day. He got everyone who would listen, which was most of us,
and began to recount an encounter he had the night before. He saw Billy's monster and described it in a very dreamlike detail. He said that he had fallen asleep on his front porch, as a lot of us did on warm nights, and woke up to the sound of heavy breathing. Opening his eyes, right there before him stood a monster with dry, pale gray skin, spikes jutting out at its joints and all the way down its back. Jack said the thing tried to grab him too, and he did have some scratches on his arm, but it looked like a fall on rocks could have caused it as well. The part that got us was how the details were so descriptive. Yes, it was dreamlike in how there were very few exact details, but the details that did exist were so powerful and descriptive. How the monster's breath smelled of rotten flesh and citrus, the way it moved in a sluggish and awkward way, as though it couldn't move without hurting itself. And then the same details of the mouth and eyes, two very small black holes just above a wide mouth, lined with spit and teeth. In the end, it was agreed that Jack had lost his mind from the loss of his pet. Only the few kids who listened actually believed Jack saw a monster that night. He was denied his firearm and the letter went out on Saturday. No one saw Jack on Sunday. At the bar, we assumed he stayed home where there's no smiling faces and the drinks keep coming. If only someone had went to check on Jack, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Thursday came. Still no Jack. That was a bad sign. After all, if he didn't buy food, it meant he wasn't eating. People were worried, but none of us said anything. We were stupid and hoped he was just going to suddenly get better and stop being crazy. It took a week for anyone to go down and check up on him. One of his close friends, Jim, went down to check up on Jack. He drove his truck down that cracked road with faded yellow paint until he got to the farmhouse. The gray paint looked new then, the barley in the back still golden and shining in the mid-noon sun. The gate out fence was still unfinished, so he climbed over it easily. He then walked up to the blue door and thumped the knocker against the cool wood 3 times. No response. He tried again, faster and faster and more of a panic. 3 quick thumps on the thick wood. When he didn't answer, Jim was concerned and planned on going to town to get the authorities. But as he took one last look at the house, he noticed the bedroom window was open. Jim called out a few times, relieved that Jack was most likely sleeping off his troubles. He didn't get a response after shouting, so he pulled the ladder out of his truck and leaned it against the house. The first thing Jim said that hit him was the smell. A terrible stench. Something akin to roadkill marinated in vomit for a week. Hard to stand something so terrible. He said he was about to climb back down and throw up all over the ground when he saw Jack. He was laying in his bed, just as Jim had figured, but he wasn't asleep. He was dead. And worse, he was mutilated. One arm was chewed down to the bone. The skin on his chest ripped off of his ribcage and crushed. Both of his legs were missing a serious portion of muscle. His skull was exposed. One eye was missing and his scalp was gone. His abdomen had been ripped into as well, the smell coming from bits of meat and organs soaking into Jack's bile. Jim vomited all over the floor. I suppose it goes without saying that no one saw Jack again. The funeral was closed casket, and it was a very solemn day. No one wanted to bring up Billy's monster, but everyone must have been thinking it. Then a young girl, must have been around 8, loudly asked her mother if the monster ate up Mr. Cruller. There was a collective shudder between all in attendance, and the mother began trying to explain to the daughter why she couldn't say such things. Then a boy, only a few years older, piped up and shouted that the carnivore is what killed Jack. Carnivore was the name that Billy's monster was given, and it stuck. It was impossible for anyone to forget about the carnivore after that. Like I said, it spawned an urban legend. Now you can take this story as true, like all of us do. Or you can just take it as a good horror tale. No skin off my back either way. However, show some respect to the locals around here. They take it very seriously. It's like a boogeyman to us. It's the reason kids don't go out alone after dark. If anything is found dead and eaten, no matter how big it is, it's blamed on the carnivore. And no one sleeps with the windows open anymore. Oh, look at the time. I have to get out of here. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your night. One last thing. I don't suggest driving up to that old gray farmhouse a good ways up the road. It's still there, with its dead crops and the unfinished gate. That area has a lot of animals turn up dead at this very hour of the night.